Hi, I'm Clark Smith. I'm the winemaker for WineSmith. And I, Today I'd like to talk about my WineSmith Cabernet Franc. I'm, Cabernet Franc is a difficult grape to grow, and I guess I feel like I'm sort of known for Cabernet Francs. I make several of them, and I've been making it since 1993. Was my first vintage. I've made Cabernet Franc all over California, but to be honest, I've never found a complete vineyard. I've always had to blend sort of the masculine and feminine. So, anyway, every site gives you a completely different sort of Cabernet Franc. We'll talk about this one. I also make another couple of wines from this same vineyard, the Diamond Ridge Vineyard up in Lake County. One of them is a sulfite-free wine. It's actually the same vintage as this, and that's a really interesting wine to compare. And then I make the regular Two Jakes of Diamonds. And the difference really between the Two Jakes wine, which is less expensive, and this one is that here I give a lot of age to the wine. And so in this case, we've got a good 5 or 6 years in old, very old barrels, and so Cabernet Franc is one of the longest aging reds there are. It's got a lot of minerality, a lot of palate energy, and this one, grown on volcanic soil, is doubly so. And so, even though it's all that time in wood, it really is still quite young and fresh. Let's talk about Diamond Ridge a little bit. First of all, it's fairly high altitude for California. It's about 2,000 feet where this is grown, and that means there's a lot of UV. So a lot of the problem with Cabernet Franc is that it can have a vegetal characteristic, and that comes from shading and, in other words, not a lot of sunlight on the fruit. And so there's two things going on up there in that vineyard. One of them is the high UV, because it's thinner air and it's also got really good air circulation, and so there's no smog up there. It's really hard to get the tourists to come up. So unlike the Napa Valley, which is a big bowl of diesel fog, we have very clean air and very thin air. So that means lots of UV on the grapes, and grapes make vegetal aromas in order to fool birds when the grapes aren't really ripe. So Cabernet Franc has trouble getting ripe, and so it tends to be that way. What makes it worse is if you have a lot of water availability in the soil. Cabernet Franc is incredibly vigorous, and so it'll just put out all kinds of leaves and shade its own fruit, and that happens in heavy soils down in Napa and Sonoma. So it really is much better as a mountain-grown wine, or at least on a really porous soil. So this is a volcanic soil, decomposed granite, and that restricts the vine so that it doesn't make a whole lot of solar panel collector there and doesn't shade itself. The other advantage, I guess it's an advantage, of that volcanic soil is it makes the wines very minerally. So when I get to the finish of this wine, I'm not going to sit here very long without tasting this, but I just want to give you some background. There's a kind of a buzz in the finish that seems like acidity, but it's not, and we don't know what it is. I got a whole chapter in my book, Postmodern Winemaking, about minerality, but we don't know what it is. We get it on schist, decomposed granite, of course, limestone, and slate in the Mosel. And we also get it on living soils. If we can knock it off with the pesticides and herbicides and get a good mycorrhizal fungi population going, then we can get it that way too. But anyway, I'm really interested in wines that are minerally. partly because of the palate energy and partly because it means the wine has a very flat, long aging trajectory, and that's certainly the case here. Now, the other thing that this really interesting vineyard has going for it, unlike a lot of other Lake County vineyards, is that it's right next to the lake. So you've got kind of a mountain, volcanic soil right next to a lake effect. So that's really unusual to have both of those. And what it means is that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we all have to put on our sweaters because the temperature goes down to about 60 degrees. That means we don't get any raisoning, and we retain all of these fresh red fruit aromas and flowery aromas in all the grapes that are grown there. So those are all the elements: the lake effect, the volcanic soil, and the high UV thin air all contribute to being just a perfect place to grow Cabernet Franc. So what have I got here? You could see that for all that time in old wood, it's still, I wouldn't call it purple, but it's still quite red, maybe just a tiny little bricky edge, and plenty of color. So then when you smell this wine, to me the signature is white cherry. It's a very bright red fruit, but with some richness to it, more cherry than, say, raspberry or strawberry. And then all Cabernet Francs seem to have this cinnamon thing going on, so this is certainly spicy. And also the droughty herbs up there give what we call terroir. So we get a little bit of the aroma of sage and rosemary that's growing naturally in the area. So all those elements are in the nose, together with something that I don't know exactly how to describe, but it's a bottle bouquet, kind of aged characteristic, sort of like Romano cheese or wild mushroom, like a porcini or something. And all those elements are together in the nose. Now, Cabernet Franc has a tendency to be grainy in its tannins, and that's why I like to age it for a long time in wood, because it finally, that graininess is replaced by a sort of silkiness on the palate that this has got going for it now. And then as you swallow it, there's that dynamic mineral energy there, whatever that is. So I think what we've got here is a really well-developed wine that's ready to go. You can certainly drink it, but I think it also would sit in the cellar for a decade or so and continue to sort of expand and explore that aged bottle bouquet characteristic. It could become really quite complex. So. And I play around with wine and music quite a bit. And my favorite wine and music combination is to take this wine and get in the dark with something on fire and Bruce Springsteen's Jungle Land playing pretty loud. And I'll get a big fat glass like this and just sit